The biggest names in Formula One just turned against the FIA. Max Verstappen called the new 2026 cars Formula E with steroids. Lewis Hamilton warned they feel dangerous on the straights. George Russell is talking about crashes at 360 km per hour. And Fernando Alonso says drivers are no longer racing, they are following software instructions. This is not social media drama. This is multiple world champions publicly questioning the future of the sport. The FIA promised faster cars, closer racing, a new sustainable era. But after testing, drivers are describing something very different. Battery management instead of instinct. Artificial overtakes instead of wheel-to-wheel fights. Lower grip, higher speeds, and unpredictable active aerodynamics. If even Verstappen and Hamilton agree something is wrong, then this is not a small complaint. This could be a regulation crisis before the season even begins. Stay with me, because what the drivers are really exposing goes far beyond lap times. And it could change Formula One forever. Subscribe now, because this story is only getting bigger. Let us begin with what triggered all of this. Because this did not explode randomly. It started the moment drivers experienced full race simulations under the new 2026 energy rules. On paper, the concept sounds modern. More electrical power. Less reliance on traditional combustion. Greater sustainability. But on track, the feeling is completely different. Drivers are no longer pushing flat out from corner exit to braking zone. They are calculating. They are asking themselves, do I deploy now? Do I harvest here? Do I save for the straight after next? And that changes everything. Max Verstappen described it bluntly. He said the car feels synthetic. Not because it is slow, but because it decides when you are fast. In previous eras, if you had grip and courage, you attacked. Now, if your battery state of charge is wrong, you simply cannot. The system overrides instinct. And that is where the frustration begins. Because Formula One has always been about the limit. Late braking. Maximum commitment. Pure reaction. But under these regulations, energy deployment zones are highly structured. There are predefined areas where extra power is expected. If you use it outside those windows, you risk running empty before the most critical point of the lap. Lewis Hamilton highlighted the consequence of that imbalance. He explained that when one car is deploying full electrical boost and another is harvesting, the speed difference becomes dramatic. Not subtle. Massive. That creates sudden closing speeds on the straight. And at over 300 km per hour, small misjudgments become dangerous situations. This is not just about entertainment value. It is about predictability versus volatility. Because if overtaking becomes dependent on software timing rather than driver setup and positioning, races start to feel programmed. Fernando Alonso went even further. He warned that teams already know, before the weekend even begins, where overtakes will most likely occur. The energy deployment windows are mapped. The override zones are calculated. So the element of surprise, the spontaneous dive into a corner, is reduced. Instead, drivers become managers of pre-written scenarios. And this is the core tension. The FIA wanted innovation, but the drivers fear automation. The FIA wanted sustainability, but the drivers fear artificial racing. And when multiple champions independently express similar concerns, it stops being individual opinion. It becomes a pattern. A pattern that suggests the 2026 cars may be technologically impressive, but emotionally disconnected from what drivers consider real racing. And that disconnect is where the real problem begins. But the controversy did not stop with energy deployment. Because once drivers began pushing the cars to the limit, another issue appeared. Grip. Or more accurately, the lack of it. The 2026 regulations reduced aerodynamic load in key phases of the lap. At the same time, Pirelli introduced harder compounds to withstand the aggressive torque delivery of the electric systems. On paper, that improves durability. On track, it feels like ice. Multiple drivers described slow-speed corners as unstable. The rear stepping out without warning. The front refusing to bite. Carlos Sainz openly questioned whether the cars truly feel more agile. They were promised lighter behavior. Instead, they still feel large. Still feel heavy in direction changes. And here is the uncomfortable combination. You have extreme straight-line speed due to reduced drag, but less aerodynamic grip when you actually need to turn. That imbalance creates a strange sensation. Rocket on the straight. Fragile in the corner. George Russell, speaking not only as a driver but as a director of the Grand Prix Drivers Association, raised the safety flag. He warned that reaching 360 km per hour with lower downforce changes the risk profile entirely. Because if something fails at that velocity, the margin for correction is almost zero. Runoff areas were designed for previous aerodynamic loads, previous braking distances. Now the braking zones are different. The airflow behavior is different. And there is another layer that worries drivers even more. Active aerodynamics. The rear wing adjusts between low drag and high downforce configurations. In theory, that should improve efficiency. In practice, several drivers reported that if the system closes even a fraction too late before a braking zone, rear stability disappears instantly. Imagine approaching the first corner at enormous speed, trusting that the wing will switch to maximum downforce at exactly the right millisecond. If it does not, you are a passenger. Max Verstappen admitted that in simulation, this was already unsettling. On track, the uncertainty feels real. And uncertainty at those speeds is not thrilling. It is stressful. Now add the tire factor again. Extremely hard compounds with a narrow operating window. Kevin Magnussen described the difficulty of warming them up on out laps. That means at restarts or after pit stops, drivers can be exposed. One car on cold tires. Another with temperature already activated. Speed difference again. Closing rate again. You begin to see the pattern. Energy imbalance. Grip imbalance. Aerodynamic transition sensitivity. Each individual issue might be manageable. Together, they form a complex system that requires constant mental calculation. And this leads to the final tension point. Formula One has always demanded intelligence. But it also rewarded instinct. The 2026 cars demand constant energy management at racing speed. Drivers are not only racing opponents. They are monitoring deployment targets, battery percentages, override timing, thermal windows. It becomes a cognitive marathon. Lando Norris called it a technical challenge. He sees opportunity in mastering complexity. But others fear that racing should not feel like executing a pre-programmed strategy every lap. And when world champions publicly question whether the sport still feels authentic, the governing body cannot ignore it. Because regulations are not judged only by engineering success. They are judged by whether the people inside the cockpit believe in them. And right now, belief is fractured. The FIA may insist this is evolution. But from inside the car, many drivers are calling it something else. A transformation that risks redefining what Formula One actually is. And that is where the real storm is building. And this is where the situation becomes political. Because once drivers move from technical criticism to public pressure, the balance of power shifts. Behind closed doors, there are already whispers about formal communication from the Grand Prix Drivers Association. Not emotional complaints. Structured concerns. Energy deployment limits. Override zone flexibility. Safety margins at extreme speed. When multiple champions align on the same message, it is not coincidence. It is coordinated discomfort. The FIA, of course, maintains its position. They argue that every major regulation shift in history was met with resistance. Ground effect. Hybrid power units. Even halo protection. Drivers always adapt, they say. But this time feels different. Because this is not only about adapting driving style. It is about redefining the core sensation of racing. The 2026 philosophy places enormous emphasis on electrical power. That appeals to manufacturers. It aligns with road car relevance. It satisfies sustainability messaging. But Formula One does not survive on corporate logic alone. It survives on spectacle. And here is the uncomfortable truth. If overtakes become predictable energy events, if drivers must lift and coast even during qualifying laps to recharge batteries, if instinct is replaced by battery percentage calculation, the emotional intensity changes. The audience may not understand every technical detail, but they understand authenticity. When Verstappen says it is not fun, when Hamilton says it feels wrong, when Alonso says there will be no surprises on Sunday, fans listen. And the narrative begins to shift. Because now the question is no longer about lap time. It is about identity. Is Formula One becoming a championship of energy engineers? Or does it remain the ultimate test of human instinct at the limit? The FIA cannot afford for that doubt to grow. Not before a new era begins. Not when new manufacturers are entering. Not when the sport is expanding globally. Yet the driver's words have already planted uncertainty. And uncertainty spreads faster than regulation updates. There is even quiet speculation that minor adjustments could be introduced after the first races. Slightly wider deployment windows. Modified harvesting limits. Tweaks to active aero timing thresholds. But changing parameters after publicly defending them would expose weakness. And refusing to adjust could intensify resistance. That is the political trap. Because if the first few races produce artificial-looking overtakes or visible safety scares, the pressure will multiply. Social media will amplify every moment. every awkward battery drain on the straight, every unstable rear wing transition. And suddenly the narrative becomes impossible to control. This is why the current moment feels bigger than preseason drama. The cars have not even started racing for points. Yet the sport's biggest stars are questioning the foundation. That rarely happens. Usually, criticism is subtle. This time, it is direct. And when drivers, engineers, and fans all begin asking whether the regulations have gone too far, the governing body faces a delicate choice: double down, or adjust quickly before the season defines the narrative permanently. Because once the world decides that a new era feels artificial, rebuilding trust becomes much harder than rewriting a rulebook. And right now, trust is exactly what is at stake. But there is one final layer that makes this situation explosive: marketing. Because the 2026 regulations were not introduced quietly. They were presented as a revolution. A new era of efficiency. A cleaner future. Smarter technology. Manufacturers committed billions based on that promise. Audi is coming. Honda returned. Other brands aligned their strategy around this hybrid vision. Now imagine this. Before the first race even begins, the sport's biggest global stars are publicly questioning whether the product is enjoyable. That is a public relations nightmare. Formula One depends on narrative, heroes, villains, moments of brilliance. If the conversation shifts to battery percentages and artificial overtakes, the emotional hook weakens. And here is where Verstappen and Hamilton together become powerful. They are rivals, different personalities, different fan bases. When both express concern, it transcends team politics. It feels systemic. And that is dangerous for the governing body. Because criticism from one driver can be dismissed. Criticism from multiple champions creates legitimacy. It suggests that something fundamental may have been misjudged. Now add the timing. This is happening before fans have even seen a proper race under the new rules. The perception is forming early. And first impressions are powerful. If the opening Grand Prix features visible lift and coast on straights, if commentators are explaining battery harvest instead of wheel-to-wheel combat, if drivers sound frustrated over team radio, the narrative hardens. Once hardened, it spreads globally. The United States audience, growing rapidly, expects intensity. The United Kingdom audience, deeply traditional, expects purity of racing. If both groups feel something artificial creeping in, engagement could shift. And the FIA knows this. That is why their response has been measured. They insist this is evolution. They emphasize adaptation. They highlight long-term sustainability benefits. But evolution must feel natural. If it feels forced, resistance increases. There is also a competitive dimension. Some teams may master the complexity faster than others. If one organization cracks the energy algorithm early, dominance could return. And dominance under artificial management rules would amplify criticism even further. Because then the championship becomes not only synthetic, but predictable. That combination is toxic for entertainment value. So now we arrive at the central tension. The FIA wanted to future-proof Formula One. The drivers are warning that in doing so, the sport might be drifting away from its core sensation. Raw competition. Human instinct. Unscripted aggression.